What would you do if the grave you dug for yourself became the only chance to save another life? In the blistering heat of the Texas frontier, one broken man prepares to end it all until a dying woman and her unborn child collapse at his doorstep. As ruthless killers close in and the flames rise, his choice will decide whether hope lives or burns to ash. Stay with this story to the end, because sometimes, even in the darkest moments, a spark of redemption can light the way. Before we dive into this gripping story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters. If you love emotional, heart-pounding stories like this, hit that like button and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let's begin. The shovel hit rock again with a jarring clang that shot up Ezekiel Thornfield's arms, rattling his bones. He let out a low curse under his breath, the sound swallowed by the stillness of the Texas morning. Sweat ran in rivulets down his weathered face, leaving salty trails through the dust caked on his skin. He leaned on the shovel, staring down into the half-dug grave behind his cabin, a narrow gash in the earth, 6 feet long, 3 feet wide. Just the right size for a man who'd decided there was nothing left worth fighting for. The sun, merciless even this early, burned overhead, turning the dry earth around him into cracked plates of baked clay. His shoulders ached from hours of digging, but he didn't stop. He'd planned it out carefully, methodically, just like everything else he'd ever done. Finish the hole by noon. Write a letter to the bank explaining where his worthless land should go. Then use his father's old revolver to end 37 years of misery and failure. No family left to mourn him. No friends who gave a damn. Just another forgotten soul swallowed up by a land that chewed up dreamers and spat out bones. The drought had killed his cattle one by one, their carcasses lying bloated and stinking in the sun until he had to drag them off and burn them. The bank was circling like a buzzard, eager to foreclose on his ranch. And Sarah. Sweet Sarah had died 2 winters ago, fever taking her and the unborn child she'd carried with such hope. Ezekiel's hands tightened on the shovel. He remembered the sound of Sarah's laughter, the way it used to echo through these empty hills. He remembered how quiet it had been since. What's left for a man who's lost everything that mattered? Another shovel full of dirt flew behind him, scattering over the dry grass. Each strike of the blade against the hardpan felt like a countdown, a drumbeat toward his final hour. But then he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in this world of silence and self-pity. It was faint at first, carried on the dry wind like a ghost's whisper. A voice. A woman's voice. Weak, desperate, calling out from somewhere near the front gate. Ezekiel froze, heart hammering. His first thought wasn't mercy. It was suspicion. The land grabbers had been circling his property for months, like coyotes sniffing a wounded deer. He'd warned them plenty this land wasn't for sale, no matter how worthless it seemed. But desperate men did desperate things. He dropped the shovel and reached for his rifle, leaning against the cabin wall. The old Winchester felt heavy in his calloused hands as he crept toward the corner of the cabin boots, crunching on the dry soil. And then he saw her. A young woman, no more than 19 or 20, collapsed against his wooden gate. Her dress, once white, was torn and filthy, clinging to her thin frame. Dark hair clung to her sweat-drenched face, and her lips moved soundlessly as she tried to speak. But what made Ezekiel's heart stutter wasn't her age or her pitiful state. It was her condition. She was heavy, with child belly swollen near to bursting. One trembling hand clutched at her abdomen, and dark stains spread across the hem of her dress. Blood fresh and alarming. This wasn't some scheme. This wasn't a trap. This was a dying woman. And somehow she'd stumbled to the one place within 50 miles where the man inside had been planning to join her in the grave. Ezekiel stood there, rooted to the earth, rifle raised but useless. He felt a cold weight settle in his gut, a strange, unfamiliar feeling. Purpose. The same shovel he'd been using to dig his own grave might now be needed to bury someone else entirely. Or maybe, just maybe, to save her. His fingers slackened on the rifle as an old, long-dead instinct stirred in him, the part of him that had once worn a uniform, that had once protected the weak. Was there still enough of that man left? Before he could think, he was moving. The rifle clattered to the ground as he rushed to the gate boots, kicking up clouds of dust. Up close, she was even younger than he'd thought, her face delicate, almost childlike. Fever radiated from her skin when he touched her forehead. Her breathing was shallow, ragged. But it was the baby that worried him most. Her dress was soaked with more than sweat. Too much blood. Time was running out for them both. Please, the word was a whisper, but it cut through him like a bullet. Don't let my baby die. Ezekiel's chest tightened. Here she was, fighting to bring life into the world, while he'd been digging a hole to escape it. The bitter irony wasn't lost on him. Without thinking, he scooped her into his arms. She was frighteningly light for someone so far along, as though life was already slipping from her body. As he carried her toward the cabin, her eyelids fluttered. For a moment, two impossibly blue eyes locked on his face. Eyes full of fear and hope. And Ezekiel Thornfield, a man who thought he'd run out of reasons to live, felt the first fragile stirrings of something he thought he'd buried long ago. Ezekiel's boots thudded against the dry earth as he carried her inside the rifle, still warm from his grip, now forgotten on the porch. The cabin, once a tomb in his mind, felt alive with urgency and fear. Dust motes swirled in the sunlight, cutting through the cracks in the wooden walls as he laid her on the bed. Her breath rattled in her chest, shallow and rapid. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying faint hoofbeats that made his stomach twist. He glanced at the rifle, then back at the girl. For months he'd longed for death, now he was fighting to keep it at bay. If this story made your heart ache, if you felt the heat of the Wild West and your pulse quickened with every gunshot, hit that like button to let us know you're here. Share your thoughts. What would you have done in Ezekiel's place? And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss more tales of blood, tears, and hope on the untamed frontier. Ezekiel laid her down gently on the bed, the same bed where only hours ago he'd planned to scrawl a bitter farewell to a world that had taken everything from him. Now, in a cruel twist, it held a dying girl and an unborn child fighting for their lives. He pressed a hand to her forehead. Her skin burned like a brand. Fever. Bad. Her breath came in shallow, uneven pulls, and every few moments her body would convulse in a way that made his stomach knot. He'd delivered foals and calves before, but this, a human life, 2 of them. His hands shook as he fetched a bucket of cool water from the well and clean cloth from Sarah's old sewing basket. The smell of lavender still clung faintly to the fabric, a ghost of his wife lingering in the room. Don't let my baby die. The girl's whisper echoed in his skull like a church bell tolling for the dead. He began cleaning the dirt and blood from her face. Her skin was so pale it seemed almost translucent, like wax. And then he saw it, the angry red marks circling her wrists. Rope burns. His gut clenched tighter when he noticed the bruises on her arms, perfect imprints of hands that had gripped too hard. Someone had tied her up. Someone had hurt her, and she'd escaped. Ezekiel's eyes darted toward the windows. The barren Texas landscape stretched for miles, broken only by mesquite scrub and the occasional jagged hill. It offered good visibility and nowhere to hide if trouble came calling. The girl stirred suddenly, her lips cracking as she spoke. "They're coming." She rasped, her voice raw with panic. Her hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength for someone so weak. "They said they'd find me, no matter where I ran." Ezekiel swallowed hard. He'd thought his biggest problem this morning was deciding whether to live or die, Now there was a pregnant girl bleeding in his bed, and God only knew who riding hard to claim her. "What's your name?" he asked gruffly, forcing calm into his voice even as his heart pounded like a war drum. "Celeste," she whispered, trying to sit up despite her condition. "My father, he sold me to a man named Virgil Blackwood to pay his gambling debts." The name hit Ezekiel like a rattlesnake strike. Virgil Blackwood. Every rancher within 100 miles knew that name. A land baron with a silver tongue and a heart blacker than midnight. He controlled most of the water rights in 3 counties, bought judges and sheriffs like cattle at auction, and left a trail of whispers behind him, missing girls' unmarked graves and terror that seeped into the bones of honest folk. Celeste's voice hardened with a flicker of defiance. He said the baby was his property, that he'd raise it to be just like him. But when I went into labor early, I ran, stole a horse, rode it till it died under me, then walked. Ezekiel glanced at her raw, blistered feet and the state of her dress. The rope burns, the bruises. It all fit, and it chilled him to the core. "You picked my ranch," he said slowly. "Why farthest place? From his land?" Her blue eyes locked on his, pleading. "Please, don't send me back." Before Ezekiel could answer, she let out a sharp cry, her body seizing with another contraction. Her water broke, soaking through his wife's old blankets, and a dark spreading stain on the sheets made his stomach lurch. Too much blood. "Damn it," he muttered, moving quickly to wedge a pillow beneath her hips. Her breathing was shallow and rapid now, her hands clawing at the air as if trying to hold on to life itself. He remembered Sarah lying in this same bed 2 winters ago, fever burning her alive, while he sat helplessly by. He'd sworn never to feel that useless again. But this was worse. This was 2 lives hanging in the balance. Ezekiel's mind raced as he tried to recall what little he knew of childbirth. Towels, hot water. Calm the mother. But this didn't feel normal. There was too much blood and her face was turning the color of ash. Then he heard it. Hoofbeats. Distant but closing fast. Ezekiel cursed under his breath and grabbed his rifle, moving to the window. Dust rose on the horizon, 6 riders in formation, moving like men who knew how to kill. At their head was a figure he recognized from wanted posters. Tall, lean, silver hair, eyes cold as a winter river. Virgil Blackwood had come to collect his property, and he'd brought enough men to ensure no one stood in his way. Ezekiel's grip tightened on the rifle. He'd been ready to die this morning. He'd made peace with it. But now there was a girl in his bed fighting to bring a child into this cruel world. And for the first time in months, Ezekiel Thornfield felt a spark of the man. He used to be the soldier, the protector, the man who didn't lay down and let evil win. Ezekiel tightened his grip on the rifle as Celeste's scream tore through the cabin, her body writhing in agony. Outside, the thunder of hoofbeats grew louder, closer, each beat a drum roll of impending doom. Dust plumes rose on the horizon, like specters announcing death's arrival. He glanced from the window to the girl on his bed, her face pale as moonlight, sweat and blood mingling on her torn dress. "God help us," he muttered under his breath. The enemy was almost here, but so was the baby. And in that moment, Ezekiel knew he couldn't fail either one. Did you enjoy this story? Smash the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe now. There are more thrilling Western stories full of brave souls and life or death choices waiting for you. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, thundering across the dry earth like distant war drums. Ezekiel Thornfield crouched by the window, fingers clenched tight around his rifle stock, his knuckles white. Dust curled on the horizon, 6 riders moving in formation, their dark silhouettes stark against the blazing Texas sun. At their head rode a man Ezekiel recognized instantly. Virgil Blackwood. Tall and wiry, his silver hair gleamed like a blade in the light. Even from this distance, Ezekiel could feel the weight of those cold, calculating eyes scanning the land. Blackwood didn't ride like a man expecting resistance. He rode like a predator, confident his prey had nowhere left to run. Behind Ezekiel, Celeste cried out in agony. He turned. She lay sprawled across his bed, her body racked with violent tremors as another contraction gripped her small frame. Sweat drenched her face, and her skin had turned the sickly pale of candle wax. The dark stain spreading beneath her spoke volumes, a grim reminder that her fight for life was hanging by the thinnest of threads. "Stay with me," Ezekiel urged, wetting another cloth and pressing it to her burning forehead. "You're strong. You've made it this far." Her cracked lips parted, her voice no more than a whisper. "Don't let him take my baby." Ezekiel swallowed hard, feeling the words burn their way into his soul. Outside, the riders slowed as they neared the cabin, their horses snorting and stamping in the dust. Blackwood raised a gloved hand, and the men fanned out, taking positions that spoke of military discipline. Ezekiel's stomach twisted. These weren't drunken thugs. These were seasoned killers. He glanced toward the corner of the cabin where Sarah's sewing basket sat still open from when he'd fetched rags for Celeste. The memory of his wife's gentle smile flashed in his mind. She would have known what to do. But Sarah was gone, and now a young girl and her unborn child were depending on him. Ezekiel felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Duty. A voice boomed outside, shattering the tense silence. Thornfield Blackwood's tone was calm, almost pleasant, but it carried an edge that made Ezekiel's skin crawl. "Hand over my property, and I'll let you die quick. Keep her, and I'll burn you out like a nest of rattlers." Celeste whimpered, clutching at Ezekiel's arm with surprising strength. "They'll kill you. They'll kill her." He gripped her hand tight. "Not if I kill them first." The girl's eyes fluttered closed. Her body racked by another contraction, Ezekiel moved to the window and peered out. Blackwood's men were circling, rifles at the ready. One of them dismounted and tossed a torch from hand to hand, grinning like a wolf scenting blood. Ezekiel's heart pounded. The cabin was sturdy, thick pine logs, few windows, but it was also a trap. They could burn him out. His mind worked furiously, calling up the old instincts of a soldier. He counted 6 riders, 6 bullets in the Winchester, 2 in his Colt. Not enough, but maybe enough for a distraction. "Time's up." Thornfield Blackwood called again, his voice hardening. "You made your choice." The first shot shattered the front window glass, exploding inward. Ezekiel ducked instinctively and fired back. One of Blackwood's men screamed and toppled from his horse. Celeste shrieked not from the gunfire, but from a contraction so strong it nearly arched her body off the bed. Ezekiel's pulse raced. He was trapped between 2 impossible choices: stay and deliver the baby, or fight off the attackers. Then he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to this hellish scene. The thin, reedy cry of a newborn. Ezekiel's spun eyes widening. The baby was here. A tiny, blood-slicked head crowned beneath Celeste's dress. Ezekiel dropped his rifle hands, fumbling for clean cloths. His pulse roared in his ears as he coaxed the child free, working by instinct and desperation. The baby let out another cry, stronger this time. It was alive. Ezekiel barely had time to cut the cord and wrap the child in one of his shirts before Celeste went limp. "Celeste," he shouted, shaking her gently. Her eyes fluttered open for the briefest moment. "Rose," she whispered. "Her name is Rose?" Then her eyes closed for the last time. Outside, a new sound rose, the crackle of flames. Ezekiel's stomach sank. Smoke drifted past the window. Blackwood's men had torches and were lighting the cabin. The baby squirmed in his arms, her tiny cries muffled against his chest. Ezekiel stared down at her, his jaw tightening. He'd dug a grave for himself that morning. But now he realized that grave wasn't for him anymore. It was for Celeste. And maybe, just maybe, for the man he used to be. The cabin walls groaned as flames licked higher, the air thick with smoke and heat. Ezekiel cradled baby Rose against his chest, her cries rising with the crackle of burning wood. Celeste lay still on the blood-soaked bed, her final breath already spent. Outside, Blackwood's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "Thornfield hand, over my child, or I'll burn you alive." Ezekiel's jaw tightened. He'd been ready to die that morning, but now with Rose in his arms, surrender wasn't an option. He glanced at the root cellar door, the only chance to outwit the predators closing in. The cabin groaned under the weight of flames, the thick pine logs crackling as fire chewed through them like a starving beast. Smoke stung Ezekiel's eyes as he cradled baby Rose against his chest, her tiny cries muffled in the folds of his shirt. The heat pressed in from all sides, oppressive and alive. And for a moment it felt like the world itself was collapsing around him. He knelt by Celeste's still form, his fingers brushing a strand of sweat-damp hair from her pale face. Her lips parted in eternal silence seemed almost peaceful now, as though all the terror and pain had finally bled out with her last breath. "I'm sorry," Ezekiel whispered hoarsely. "You deserved more than this." But there was no time for grief. Outside, Blackwood's voice rang out above the roar of the fire, smooth as snake oil but edged with steel. "Thornfield, I smell smoke. You're running out of time. Hand over my child and walk out like a man, or burn with your sins like a coward." Ezekiel gritted his teeth. That voice, calm, cold, and certain, wasn't talking to him like an equal. Blackwood didn't see men. He saw tools and property. And now he thought Rose was his property too. Not if Ezekiel Thornfield had anything to say about it. He adjusted his grip on the baby, felt her tiny heartbeat fluttering like a bird's wing against his chest. Then he moved toward the trap door to the root cellar, shoving aside the old water barrel that hid it from view. The air in the cellar was cool, damp, and heavy with earth. He descended quietly, careful not to let the wooden door creak, and used his boot to nudge it shut above him. From here he could slip out the hidden back entrance circle around, and God willing take at least a few of Blackwood's men with him. But as he reached the ladder's bottom rung, he froze. Boot steps creaked on the porch above. Celeste, darling, Blackwood's voice called out, sickeningly tender now. "I know you're frightened, but this ends here. Papa's here to take you and the baby home." Ezekiel's stomach churned. That man didn't want a family, he wanted control. He pictured Rose growing up in Blackwood's house, her childhood poisoned by the same darkness that had claimed her mother. No, he couldn't let that happen. He pressed Rose closer, whispering against her downy hair. "I promised her I'd keep you safe, and I'll burn the world before I break that promise." Above him, the cabin door creaked open. Ezekiel strained to hear through the crack in the floorboards. Blackwood's boots thudded on the wood, confident, unhurried. "Where's my child?" Thornfield Ezekiel's hand tightened on his Colt. He'd have one chance. Then a sound split the tension, a gunshot. Not from inside the cabin, from outside. Blackwood's voice snapped to anger. What the more gunfire erupted outside, shouts and curses rising in panic. Ezekiel's heart raced. Who in God's name? The answer came as quickly as the thought. "Afternoon, Thornfield." A woman's voice, low and calm, drifted through the open trap door at the rear of the cellar. Ezekiel spun and found a familiar silhouette standing in the dusty light. Deputy Marshal Kate Sullivan. She leaned against the frame, a cigarette dangling from her lips and her rifle slung casually over one shoulder. Behind her, two of Blackwood's men lay groaning in the dirt, their guns kicked far out of reach. "Heard there might be some trouble out your way," she said with a wry smile. "Trouble's an understatement," Ezekiel muttered. Kate stepped forward, her sharp eyes catching on the baby nestled in his arms. "That her?" Ezekiel nodded. "Rose. Her mother didn't make it." Kate's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed steady. "Then let's make sure she didn't die for nothing." Another gunshot cracked outside, closer this time. Blackwood was still alive. Kate glanced toward the burning cabin. Time to end this. Together they slipped out the hidden exit and circled the cabin. Flames roared skyward, silhouetting Blackwood as he barked orders to his remaining men. He turned just in time to see Ezekiel emerge from the shadows, Colt raised. "Your reign ends here," Blackwood Ezekiel called out. Blackwood's cold eyes fixed on the baby, then on Ezekiel. "Hand her over, and I might let you live. Not a chance." For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed Blackwood's face, but he covered it quickly, reaching for his gun. Kate was faster. Her rifle cracked like thunder, and Blackwood staggered back, a red bloom spreading across his chest. He fell to his knees, shock etched on his face. "Rose is free," Ezekiel said quietly, "just like her mother wanted." Blackwood's eyes locked on Rose one last time. Something regret maybe flickered there. Then he toppled forward into the dust. The fight was over. As silence settled, Ezekiel looked down at Rose. Her tiny hand curled instinctively around his finger, and for the first time in years, he felt something like hope. The smell of smoke still clung to Ezekiel's clothes as he stepped out of the root cellar. Baby B Rose cradled tight against his chest. The cabin was gone, reduced to a skeletal frame of blackened timber glowing with dying embers. He glanced back once, eyes lingering on the spot where Celeste had given her last breath. "I'll keep her safe," he murmured. Behind him, Kate Sullivan holstered her rifle, scanning the horizon for any sign of Blackwood's remaining men. The sun was setting over the hills, but for the first time, Ezekiel felt like a new day was beginning. If this story made you pause and reflect, tap like to keep us inspired. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more gripping stories of the Wild West, where every man must fight for justice and hope. The cabin was nothing but a smoldering ruin, now blackened timbers crackling as smoke curled toward the orange Texas sky. The smell of charred wood and blood hung heavy in the air. Ezekiel Thornfield stood among the ashes, baby Rose cradled gently in his arms, her tiny face pressed against his chest. For a moment, all he could hear was her breathing, soft, fragile, but alive. He looked down at her and felt the weight of the promise he'd made to her mother. "Your baby will be free." A shadow passed beside him. Deputy Marshal Kate Sullivan holstered her rifle and let out a slow breath. "That was one hell of a fight, Thornfield," she said, her voice low. "You didn't just save her. You saved yourself." Ezekiel's gaze drifted to Celeste's body, lying a few feet away. Her dress still stained with blood and soot. She deserved more than this, a lonely death in a stranger's cabin, her body left for the buzzards. He thought of the grave he'd been digging that morning, the one meant for himself. Now it seemed that grave had a different purpose. "I'll finish digging it," Ezekiel said softly. "But not for me." Kate nodded understanding. She knelt by Celeste's side, brushing soot from the young woman's delicate face. "She fought harder than anyone I've ever seen. You make sure her fight wasn't for nothing." The setting sun cast long shadows across the ruined ranch as Ezekiel wrapped Celeste's body in what remained of a clean sheet. He carried her to the half-dug grave behind the cabin, the shovel still stuck in the hard-packed earth. Each strike of the blade felt different now. Less like a death knell, more like a hymn, a prayer for peace. When he lowered her into the earth, Rose stirred in his arms, her small fingers curling instinctively around the fabric of his shirt. He looked down at her, and for the first time in months, felt something stir inside him. Something warm, steady, and alive. "I couldn't save your mama," he murmured to the infant, his voice rough with emotion. "But I'll damn sure save you." As the last clods of dirt thudded softly onto Celeste's resting place, Kate stepped up beside him. "You know Blackwood wasn't the only monster out here," she said quietly. "His kind don't disappear overnight. There'll be others." Ezekiel looked out over his barren land, the soil cracked and dry from months of drought. Once it had seemed worthless, just another broken dream in a hard country. Now it felt like the only place he could raise a child who deserved a future. "Let them come," he said, his voice calm, but edged with steel. "This land took everything from me once. I won't let it take her." Kate smirked faintly. "Sounds like you've got fight left in you after all." Ezekiel adjusted Rose in his arms. The baby's eyes opened for a moment, startlingly blue, just like her mother's, and fixed on him. In that gaze he saw defiance, life, and a fragile trust that cut deeper than any bullet. He thought about the man he used to be, a soldier, a husband, a rancher. All those pieces had burned away, but in the ashes something new was forming. A father. "What now?" Kate asked, studying him carefully. "We take her to town," Ezekiel said. "She needs a doctor, and I'll need papers, adoption protection, whatever it takes to keep her safe." Kate nodded approvingly. "I can help with that. You've got friends you don't even know about Thornfield." The sky burned gold and crimson as they prepared to leave the desert wind, carrying away the last traces of smoke. Ezekiel mounted his old horse, holding Rose tight in the crook of his arm. Kate swung into her saddle beside him. As they rode away from the ruins, Ezekiel looked back one last time. The grave behind the cabin caught the dying light, the earth freshly turned. "Goodbye, Celeste," he whispered. "She'll know your name. I'll make sure of it." The baby shifted slightly, letting out a soft sigh. Ezekiel felt his chest tighten, not with sorrow this time, but with resolve. He'd dug a grave that morning, ready to bury himself in everything he had been. But instead, he'd buried a broken man and uncovered something infinitely more precious, the chance to build a life worth living. As the sun dipped behind the Texas hills, casting long shadows across the land, Ezekiel Thornfield rode on. Behind him lay ashes and graves. Ahead of him, a future he never thought he'd have a chance to raise a daughter who would never know the monster who claimed her, only the man who chose to save her. And for the first time in years, he felt alive. This story is ultimately about redemption, sacrifice, and the fragile yet unyielding spark of hope that can rise even in life's darkest moments. Ezekiel Thornfield begins as a broken man hollowed out by grief and despair, ready to surrender his life to the barren Texas soil. But in the unexpected arrival of Celeste, a young woman fighting for her unborn child, he is confronted with a choice to continue down the path of self-destruction or to stand and protect something greater than himself. Through Celeste's courage, even as her own life fades, Ezekiel is reminded that true strength often lies in the act of giving, not taking. Her desperate plea, "Don't let my baby die," becomes the spark that reignites Ezekiel's purpose. In protecting Rose, he finds meaning where there was only emptiness, and in burying Celeste with dignity, he symbolically buries his own hopelessness and grief. The story speaks to the enduring human capacity for compassion and resilience. It explores how even a soul consumed by pain can find renewal through love and responsibility. In a world scarred by greed and cruelty, represented by Virgil Blackwood, Ezekiel's choice to fight for Rose shows that justice and goodness can still prevail when someone dares to stand up. At its heart, The tale reminds us that life often offers second chances in the most unlikely ways, and that even in the desolation of loss, we can uncover something worth living and fighting for. Ezekiel chose to stand and protect life instead of giving in to death. What about you? Hit like, share the moment that moved you most in the comments, and subscribe now to join us for the next heart-pounding adventure.